Hi. During playback a little bit, I recorded my earlier video a few minutes ago, and I couldn't hear any sound. I know my iPhone wasn't playing sound after a while when I got out of the car to record the one before last one, that 4-minute one. So I'm recording this blah, 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 just to make sure there's sound. I want to talk about the topic I talked about in the earlier video. It's about after recording the video about the shortening attention span, my concern about the shortening attention span, I took a walk and I came back. I'm imagining people are probably making fun of my hair and who knows, blah, blah, blah. All right, I'll just continue. I came back and I thought about science fiction and fantasy. Now, I had grown up with my first film that I recall seeing in a movie theater was Return of the Jedi. Before that, I had seen The Sound of Music and other movies, maybe even Superman. But that was the first one that I had seen in a movie theater, and it was very deep. I would call it fantasy, although some people could call it science fiction. And then I was very interested in Star Wars, and I want to talk about the mockery and the lack of understanding about science fiction, particularly Star Trek, that I feel is also worrisome, and it ties in with the earlier concern about short attention span. Ironically, science fiction and fantasy are prime examples of how deeply stories can be told, because they're not limited by the physical material reality. So they can really tell good stories about the human condition, how people relate to each other, and so forth. I want to get into that, but I want to mention that's the main thing. Ironically, in this age of shortening attention spans, it ties in with what I faced as a child. People not understanding how good Star Trek was and has been when I was growing up. As I said, the earliest movie I remember seeing in the movie theater was Return of the Jedi, and then Transformers paralleled alongside my interest in Star Wars, and then I became interested in Star Trek as well, and really heavily interested in Star Trek. Boy, I'm making a goof myself. And I remember the I guess the mockery that I got. It's not necessarily mockery. I think it was the inability. Maybe I should delve into this more deeply. My memories of feeling ostracized because people didn't know what Star Trek was. I remember in the media, the media portrayal of people who were interested in science fiction and especially Star Trek were like people who lived in their parents' basements and they couldn't get a date, and they weren't emotionally mature and so forth. And I'd say quite the opposite. I think of, not that Steven Spielberg was necessarily interested in Star Trek, but I think of artists like Steven Spielberg and George Lucas and people who are in the movie industry and the television industry who are very attuned to exploring the human condition, exploring problems that people deal with. And film is like the campfire. We've always had that tradition of telling stories. Why do we have that tradition of telling stories? It's so that we can explore things as a group and experiences and feel that we're not alone. If we're facing some problem, we're not alone because somebody else has experienced it too. And there's some sympathy, there's some camaraderie, there's a feeling of kinship. And we can feel that we're not alone, and we can and if a story doesn't necessarily show how a problem should be resolved, at least it's a discussion about what we face. It's an exploration, and it's a feeling that we're not alone. Again, that we're not alone. And all right, so this would be interesting. I became interested in Star Trek really in fifth grade when I saw Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home, and I um, I vaguely remember people. I remember a Halloween would have been sixth grade Halloween, where in school, where obviously where we would dress up in costume, we would parade through the different classrooms, and I sewed a an original series science fiction or science in Star Trek the original series. The uniforms were color coded, so you have red being engineering and support services. Command was yellowish green color, and science was blue. Science and life sciences were blue, and so I remember feeling like I should choose a color, and what color would I probably choose if I were to go into this Star. For those of you who don't know, in Star Trek, it depicts a future. It's set in the future, and it's like the U.S. Navy. And the equivalent of the U.S. Navy in space, the Earth's Navy in space, is called Starfleet. And so I figured if I were to go into Starfleet, which division would I pick? What color uniform would it be? And it would probably be sciences. Um, I don't know if I would still pick that or not, but and that I think that showed up the true purpose of Starfleet is to explore and understand the universe. So I picked blue. So I sewed a blue uniform as close to the Star Trek series as I could. And so for Halloween, and I remember coming home, and I remember some younger kid. I would walk home along a road, and I remember some younger kid saying, not in my class, but saying something like, "Where are the pointy?" Or he said, "I hate Star Trek," and he sprayed me with water or something. And I remember, um, I remember there was a moment when in fifth or sixth grade, maybe it was sixth grade, we were assigned book reports, and I admit I cheated, but I picked Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, and I had a novel adaptation, and I knew enough. I had already seen the movie, and we were to read the book a little bit. There was like in preparation, like over the course of a few days, we would read the book and then give a presentation at the end. Of course, admittedly I cheated because I already knew the storyline already. I'd seen the movie, but I did read the book, and I went up when it was my turn. I went up, and somebody cautioned me, not cautioned, but somebody suggested, hey, instead of saying Khan, say, and I won't use it here, but part of the female anatomy. And so when I was summarizing the story, I remember it looked like that kid was making faces when I was standing there looking at the class. And I remember wanting so much to illustrate through this story how relevant and how dramatic and important the movie was. But I remembered that female anatomy thing, and I started crying, and I couldn't finish the book report, and so I sat down, and I remember in seventh grade, it was in science class. I would take Star Trek novels to read in my spare time, and I remember reading a few of them. And in seventh grade, there was a kid that sat next to me, we were in like would sit around in like a long table, and like only three of us would be sitting around, and there'd be another table with a few others. And I remember, I won't mention his name, but I remember who he is. He's deceased now, but he asked, what's the book about, or who wins? And I was thinking, on the one hand, it's very endearing, and I felt nice. I felt comfortable and flattered that he would be actually asking me what the movie is about, what the book is about. I think it was, I don't remember what book it was exactly, but it was a Star Trek novel. And I wanted to tell him, but I was also kind of caught by him asking, well, who wins or something or other. And Star Trek is not that kind of like who wins or who loses. It just seems strange for him to ask a question like that. In general, I don't remember for sure, but I wouldn't be surprised if people had made weird drawings, in some way mocked me for my interest in Star Trek. Um, so I'm wondering if some of them have since watched the show and um, now understood the relevance of it to people's lives and to society in general. Um, I I don't know. I connect that with the short attention span. I remember I would, during a very low point in my life, I was struggling. I felt isolated. What had happened was um, I I couldn't communicate. I very much wanted to understand what happened with somebody else in my class, and so I would write some letters and make contact to former classmates. We had since graduated, and I wanted to express how sad I was, and how important this was, how I felt, um, to convey basically how I felt, um, with another person, with another classmate. Of course, classmate, any classmate. The very fact that they were the person would be a classmate, would mean that they at least knew me somewhat, at least in terms of like knowing me in class. So I would write some letters, and I remember in some of them, in order to express how I felt, I would use allusions um, to history, historical figures, and a few times to Star Trek. Moments in Star Trek episodes, and I figured they hadn't seen Star Trek, but at least I would be able to. The moments in the episodes were powerful enough so that if I could describe the context, it would carry the emotional relevance, even though it was a separate a storyline in some episode they hadn't seen. At least I could convey the context and then convey what happens, and they could pick up on the relevance. Oh yeah, this thing in outer space between two starships, and one person, how he relates to this other person, this other ship. Um, that's literally what's happening. But emotionally, what's happening? Um, there's a thing that I can understand. So if, like, for in this other person, the receiver of my letter, I was figuring could understand emotionally what was going on, even though he or she hadn't seen the episode. If I introduce it with the proper context and then summarize what happened, the person could draw from that and understand what was going on. There's a technique in ancient times, like 2,000 years ago, there was a common technique of using illusion in order to explain a concept or theme. It shows up a lot in Kabbalistic texts. It shows up a lot in Christian Gospels and Christian writings as well, in the Christian Bible. You can understand a concept better through allusion to something else. But I think it would go over people's heads, and I'm not sure to this day. I'm not sure if they just read this thing about outer space and something, and their minds just went blank, and they it's like they suddenly ignored or were blind, deaf, and dumb to. I shouldn't say dumb because that relates to inability to speak, vocalize. Deaf and blind to what was right in front of them, what I was explaining right in front of them. It's like there's an off thing. I don't know if that was actually happening or not. I hope sometimes people picked up on what I would the anecdotes I was describing in these episodes. But anyway, I think that relates to the shortening attention span, and I talked about in my earlier video, and the very worrisome concern I have about people who aren't able to tell story, don't have the attention spans long enough to be able to pick up nuances in films and stories in general. That would affect them. It would affect our society's culture and affect our society, affect each one of us, because then we wouldn't be able to emotionally relate to each other, and those that can be able to emotionally relate, are capable of it, would feel very ostracized and alone. And those who are interested in science fiction and interested in Star Trek have felt that, have definitely felt that, absolutely felt that. And so I, um, I hope that things change. I'd like to hear comments. I probably won't get any because I don't have that much of an audience, but I wanted to get this out. Maybe sometime in the future, if I'm long dead or whatever, if I'm gone already, people will see this video and they will understand what was going through my mind. I guess I hope there's not a growing lack of imagination in people. I guess that's all that I wanted to say. All right, so long.